Ken upstairs. Ken upstairs. Is it dead? Those working, Nancy? While they're doing that, we'll talk a little bit more. I kind of thought about doing evangelism, but maybe it'll be for another quarter because it's something that when I got into it, I really needed to sit down longer hours than I did to start it. So I've had these books on First Thessalonians for a long time, and I thought we'd do it. We got no sound? Huh? Well, hey, my mind ain't right this morning. 1 Corinthians, okay. Turn on to lesson 1. It says establishment of the church on occasion of this letter. The church was established in Corinth about AD 52. We find that in Acts 18 and 19 on Paul's second missionary journey. During this first visit, he wrote 1 and 2 Thessalonians and possibly Galatians. Shortly after he left, Apollos came, but we're not certain how long Apollos stayed. On the third tour, Paul was at Ephesians about 2 to 3 years, and while there, in the spring of the year before Pentecost, 1 Corinthians 16:8, he wrote this letter about AD 55-56. Paul stayed in Corinth. Unlike the letter to Rome, a city in which Paul had never been, he had stayed in Corinth a year and a half longer than any other city except Ephesians. Found that in Acts 18:11. He supported himself by making tents with Aquila and Priscilla. The most notable convert was Cyprus, chief ruler of the synagogue, and we see that in Acts 18:8. When the Jews made insurrections against Paul, Galley and a Roman deputy would not take the action that involved their religion, so the Greeks then beat Cilicis, chief ruler of the synagogue. So we see that when the Roman deputy would not take action against them over their religion, then they picked out another person to beat. Paul was told much people were in this city. Paul's plans of travel on his third journey, he had planned to go through Corinth up to Macedonia and return by Corinth and the winter there. However, he went by land through Macedonia first, and then I can't give him. And this is where he wrote 2 Corinthians. Then he came down to Corinth, from which he wrote Romans, Thessalonians, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, and Romans were written within the space of a year, AD 57-58, while Paul was on his third missionary tour. Any comments? Phil's trying to get settled up back there so he can get ready to start. Okay, he left Corinth, headed back to Jerusalem with the contributions for the poor saints. Upon arriving there, he was seized and imprisoned. Now we're going to a little bit about the city of Corinth. Corinth was the capital of the Roman province of Antioch and surpassed all other cities of the ancient world in political and commercial importance. Corinth was situated in the narrows, and I said this word, insomuch, which is connected to Papadisa, yeah, with the Greek mainland. On the east was the Aegean Sea, and on the west was an Adriatic Sea. Traffic both north and south of Greece had no alternative but to pass through this area because of Corinth was the most dangerous cape of the Mediterranean. This location on the main route of travel between East and West Corinth became the chief center of trade between Asia and Rome. The greatest amount of traffic would pass through Corinth, crossing the isthmus by land. Smaller vessels were pulled over land about 6 miles by means of ships, tramway, and wooden rails, avoiding the dangerous 200-mile trip by sea. Consequently, it was full of people from all parts of the world. A population of about 400,000, a rich and populous city, probably the fourth largest city in the Roman Empire, following Rome, Alexandria, and Antioch in that order. Wealth flowed in it from all quarters until it became the most gay and dissolute city of time. Corinth was a city of culture and influence, distinguished for refinement and learning. In addition to being a great commercial city, it also provided itself upon the culture. Corinth, abundant in studies and workmanship in halls of rhetoric and schools of philosophy. Every part of the literature was cultivated in there, so that before its destruction by Rome, it was called the Light of Greece. The city was known for its athletic events and host of the Isthmic Games. Corinth was also noted for its wickedness. With the added vices brought from the cellars of all parts of the world, Corinth was a synonym not only for wealth, luxury, but also for drunkenness, immorality, and dissipation. A Corinthian became a byword for evil and immoral living, synonymous with drunken and immoral debauchery. The temple of Venus, also called Aphrodite, was there, the goddess of love. In this temple were 1,000 priestesses encouraging prostitution in the name of religion. These women attended at sacrifices and sang sacred hymns with other citizens. We see that Corinth, also being one of the largest cities, was also one of the most wicked cities that there was. And it's partly because of its area, partly because of where it reached, and the people that come through there. We see here that people can influence all things. People influence our lives as they did in Corinth. So think about that when we're doing it. Even such a wicked city, a church of the Lord was established. 1 Corinthians 6, 9, and 10 illustrate that it was a hotbed of vice. Is there any wonder that some regarded the preaching of the gospel as foolishness? Or why Paul would have been in weakness, fear, and trembling. Can you imagine Paul going into this city and all the wickedness going on and all vices and him there to preach the gospel? Do you not wonder how he felt? You understand why he was scared and worried about it? The city shows exceeding grace of God in collecting a church, collecting the church in such an environment, and provides the power of the gospel in overcoming the strongest and most polluted passions of nature. We read that this, number 3, tells us that the church growed. There were people there wanting to hear the gospel. Even though weakness and sin was all around them, they still wanted to hear God's word. The circumstances that prompted this letter, this was written on Paul's 3rd preaching tour during a long 3-year stay at Ephesians, probably about AD 55 or 56. This would have been about 3 years after he had been in Corinth, although he might have visited once while in Ephesians on his 3rd journey. He had maintained contact with the Church of Corinth, perhaps through exchange of letters, as well as by traveling brethren. Problems at Corinth reflect how a church is affected by its culture. Troubles that arrived soon after Paul had left, and now he writes back to help encourage and admonish them with the gospel. The reports had become disturbing. Thus, he wrote pointedly about several matters. Number 1, the church had become factitious in following men. They were puffed up and tolerant, even incest among them. They were contending against one another in heathen civil court. He answered questions about marriage. Instructions was needed about the eating of meat offered to the idols. The Lord's Supper became a secular banquet and a scene of envy and dishonor. They needed instructions regarding spiritual gifts. Some were denying the doctrine of the resurrection of the dead. Titus probably carried the letter confirming the need of the collection. There's 8 problems that Paul wrote about the city of Corinth. How does a church become factitious in following men? What causes that? Come on, people, this is a participation class. Yeah, that's a big part. When you get a large group around, then everybody wants their way. They want everything their way, and then you have some people that are weak and say, okay, let's follow them. They're right, and they go in that section. But you also have those who are strong that will stand up for what's right. And that's what the Church of Corinth wasn't doing. It wasn't standing up for what was right. It was going along with what they were agreeing, what they were saying. They were puffed up and tolerant even of incest among them. What about that? What do you think they were doing wrong there? And incest among them kind of explains itself. They were contending against one another in heathen civil court. What do we mean by they were going against one another in court? What were they doing? Were they... Go ahead.
They're supposed to settle problems in the church, not in the courts.
Yeah. When we have a problem in the church, we're supposed to handle it in the church, not take somebody to court to settle it or whatever. I think at one time we might have started to have the problem here, but we nipped it in the bud with some actions. But we're not to, if we have a problem with a brother or a problem with something, we settle it among ourselves. We do not try to say, I'm going to take you to court, I'm going to sue you for this, I'm going to sue you for that. I mean, I know people that basically have just about made a good living off of suing people.
He kind of gets down on him. He says, aren't you all, basically he said, aren't you all talented enough to bring out a brother, do something, whatever, to sit down and figure it out?
Yeah.
He kind of hit out on that. Surely you're not that eager.
Well, I mean, we're plainly told that when we have a problem with brother or brother's fallen way, even in that way, to go to him. If that don't work, we take another person with us. If that don't work, we take a church. We go to the church and tell the church. And hopefully by that time, the brethren will be back. I mean, I know for a fact of one that was disfellowshipped years and years ago that's now a preacher. You know who I'm talking about. He turned his life around and he turned his life to God. Now he preaches. So we do know that there's ways to handle things, and we do know that it works. So what about the question of marriage? I'll get with you later, Phil. Oh, okay. Instructions was needing about the eating of meat offered to idols. What did he tell them about eating the meat of idols? Turn to... Huh? Yeah. Basically, yeah. I mean, it's basically basic and breaking it down in simple terms. The Lord's Supper become a banquet and a scene of envy and dishonor. They were having a big meal like we have a fellowship meal. And somewhere or another, I don't see where that is commanded, that we have a big meal when we take the Lord's Supper. Through the vine and the bread is the only thing that I've ever read that was commanded in the Lord's Supper. And they were taking it to extremes.
They weren't doing it to celebrate or remember Christ's resurrection.
Yeah, basically they were having as we'd say, a cookout. You know, fellowship meal. It was all a big meal. In the Bible, we're commanded to take the bread, which represents Christ's body, the fruit of the vine, which represents his blood, is all we're commanded to do.
So was having the meal before they were doing the Lord's Supper, was that a sin?
Not if they were having it and they took it in a way that we're told to. If they were having a meal and then having church, and then having the Lord's Supper, and there'd been nothing matter with it. But to me, in my thoughts, if it was during worship service, and it was a part of worship service, the meal, then I think that would have been wrong. Because nowhere do you see that we're told to have a meal during service. We're laid out what we're to do in worship to God. And a fellowship meal or whatever is part of our Christian lives, but it's not part of it as God laid it out, his worship.
I think the problem more with that meal was not that they had the meal and then were trying to do the Lord's Supper. It was what was
Yeah, you're right in that respect, but still, the meal should have been after or before. It shouldn't have been in the service. And yes, the envy and dishonor, that's where it comes from, their hearts and their minds. You know, we're told, rich man, poor man. Rich man comes in, comes sit up front. So, poor man comes in, dressed in rags, sit in the back. Sit back here in the corner. Instead of that happening, what should be done? The poor man is just as good as the rich man. The smart man's just as good as the one that's not smart. Or I'll say dumb, anyway. Fits my category, but anyway, kind of going away, but the point there is no one is better than anybody else. We're all equal in God's eyes. You could be a rocket scientist and you could be a ditch digger. You're still equal in God's eyes because you're one of His children. Larry. Yeah. But, you know, that's something that they were probably doing. Yeah, they were probably, the poor and the not well dressed were probably set off to the side. And more than likely they had places set for them to eat.
Well, the text even says that some of them were drunk.
Yeah. You know, how do you justify being drunk coming to church? I mean, I really don't see how you justify drinking because the Lord said, "Do not let strong drink touch your lips." And He also said, "Sip of wine for the stomach is all right." And at that time, wine and alcoholic beverages, things like that, were used as medicine. I mean, my daddy passed away in '67, and the doctors, his doctor had him take a drink of brandy before he went to bed every night to keep the congestion down. But you know, I couldn't imagine coming to worship service drunk. I could not imagine doing that. I mean, when I had benevolence, we had people come in that you know they'd been drinking and everything, wanting food, money, or whatever. Bonnie. Well, you know, yeah, they had to travel far away. I mean, we've heard people talking about going to South Africa and having services and people walking for probably hundreds of miles just to get to worship. Mr. Hogg talked about that a lot when he was in South Africa teaching, how far people traveled. And apparently, when Paul preached, they traveled a lot. But now in Corinth, we're not told if they traveled to there or if it's just people in the city. So we're not told that.
Bill Bright was telling another time that he was in Africa, the building was full, and there were 2 or 3 cars outside.
Yeah,
That means everybody walked.
everybody walked. And
And they fed them too at that time. Jerry, would say that they had meals cooked for that week. And then they ate after the services.
okay. They needed instruction regarding spiritual gifts. What do we mean there? What do they need instructions in spiritual gifts? Huh?
Let me step back just a second. When you're talking about the Lord's Supper and the way that's treated and abused, that shows you the patience of God. Imagine if your son had died for all these people, and they were celebrating by having a party and drunk and that kind of thing. It'd be hard not to laugh.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's a good point.
That's how much patience God has.
Chapter 12 starts off, now concerning spiritual gifts, brethren, I do not want you to be ignorant. You know that there were Gentiles carried away to these dumb idols. However, you were led, therefore I make known to you that no one speaking by the Spirit of God calls Jesus accursed, and no one can say that Jesus is Lord except the Holy Spirit. So we're told in the first couple verses there that they were worshiping dumb idols as gifts in the Lord's Supper. There are differences of ministries, but the same Lord. There are different ways of ministering, but it's still the same Lord. There's only one true word, and that's the Bible. That's the only word we have to know what God wants us to do. The Thessalonians, they were worshiping idols. She got me started on Thessalonians. In Corinth, they were worshiping idols along in their worship service. He says he don't want you to be ignorant. And he says, carried away to these dumb idols, however you were led. What's he saying there? I mean, what did the people there do? Did people go away from the Bible and start using idols? Remember the golden calf. You know, they completely knowed what God wanted. And Moses had told them before he went up on the mountain that he would come back. And when he come back, they had melted the gold down and made a golden calf. So we understand that there's only one true idol, and that's Jesus Christ. There's only one true Bible, and that's the book he gave us. You know, we see other books, Book of Mormons, we got different things, different in it, and you see churches that have the creeds that part of their creed don't go along with the Bible. Is that kind of what he's saying here? That men are coming up with their own ways of worshiping? That they're, you got something to say, Phil. I know, I can see it in your eyes. Go ahead. No, go ahead. I need to hear it. No. It's a good question. What were they doing, Larry?
And a synagogue, did they have, how was the synagogue set up? I mean, they didn't have chairs in the synagogue, I mean, you went to the synagogue to worship. If they're going to this place to eat, and then the Lord's Supper is an afterthought, and it's set up like you're saying, right? There's a pit, and you're reclining around it. In the synagogue, how was the synagogue structured? That's what I'm saying. I'm right, I think that's what I'm trying to say. Well, they didn't have church buildings. So they would have, so how was a synagogue structured where they might have been worshiping Jesus as well? They didn't have chairs. Or did they have chairs?
Yeah, something to think about. I mean, I don't have the answer.
No, I don't, I mean, it was one of those, I'm like, well, of course they were eating there, so they were laying down because they were, I mean, it's where they were.
Yeah. Larry?
Back to the ark and the old cat and all that stuff. All the things that God did to bring the children of Israel out of captivity, and then they go back and worship that old cat. I mean, that is mind blowing, you know.
Yeah.
They walked 40 years in the wilderness because they had enough faith to eat over that time. But back to the temple and the meetings and everything. Temple was set up for a lot of people to come and go through. I don't know that they had anything set up or anything else because you come in, usually you brought the sacrifice in the high priest, he was sacrificing for you. And so when these Christians bring in, this is a major hub. There was a lot of traffic back to the Corinthians. The people, they influenced a lot of different things. And I think that they were setting themselves aside, like, kind of like sometimes in the church we have critics. We do, hang out with this group, not this group, and all that. And that's, we need to treat everybody equal. Everybody on the same page. And I think that was a lot of problems back then, was they still wanted to do the higher echelon, and they wanted to do the lower echelon. And they would get together and have their meals and whatnot, and excluding other people. But the problem was, they was doing it, forgetting the Lord's Supper and the meal. They forget the reason they were there at the beginning. And I think that was the big problem, is they were just putting themselves before Christ.
Christ. Yeah, I mean, that's a good thought. We know that there was something going on because it became a secular banquet and a scene of envy and dishonor. So we know that they were doing something during the worship that they weren't supposed to be doing. So if they were having a meal or whatever, shouldn't have been there. The fruit of the vine and bread is the only thing that's supposed to have been took. But also, they shouldn't have said, well, okay, you sit over here, you're over here. You're the genius side, you're the dumb side. Go ahead.
When I was a young man, churches, Christ did not have fellowship hall. Once in a while, they'd have dinner on the ground outside. They didn't have a place in the building to eat. No, the building is not cold or anything. People in it for the church. But back then, they set the church aside when you gathered, it was assembly house for the gospel. That's the only thing you could use for. As time went on, they realized to more good than having facilities we can all come together and fellowship one another. Afterwards, or just like that time when we got together in the school meeting. It's good for us to fellowship together as Christians.
Yeah. Years ago, for years, Mom did not believe in eating in the church building. And her parents and probably her whole family did not believe it. They thought if you was gonna eat, you need to be outside. Because they didn't go for it. They didn't go for, having a fellowship hall and meals inside the building, which, you know, you kind of wonder what the difference is, because like Larry said, the church is not the building. The church is the souls in it, built. Yeah, they were celebrating what the Jews had as a feast. But still, if they were doing it in the service, shouldn't have been there. The Lord's Supper's the only thing should have been took during the service. Nova.
Oh, no, I agree with everybody. I think that's the distinction, it's not where you are, it's what your purpose is for being where you are and what you're doing. So we can have the Lord's Supper out in the parking lot and have it still be right, because we had the purpose of getting together to remember the Lord in the Lord's Supper as they did in the first century.
Yeah, I think we're playing the toe when we gather together. We get together as his family, as a church, and it does not say we have to have a building or anything to gather together to worship. Larry.
Well, when they first started Kodak, we had Uncle Wooddale barn, whatever, started, and had communion and worship service there. So where you're at does not make the church.
No.
You meet outside in the tent, you used to have tent meetings all the time. So, have worship service there.
Well, you know, when we were the traveling vagabonds, we worshiped in a Methodist church. We worshiped in a Baptist fellowship hall. But we were the Church of Christ. We were worshiping Christ. We weren't worshiping their creeds or whatever. We were doing what God had told us. And that's one thing that we always have to remember. It's why we're doing it. You know, I wonder, when I stand up here doing the Lord's Supper and you look around at the people, you really wonder if they're really concentrating on the Lord's Supper and what the Lord done for us. Of course, we're way off subject now, but still, when you're in discussion about Christ and his ways, his wants and ways, you need to learn, and we learn from every bit of it, not just one certain part, Bill.
Yeah, a lot of they have some new, like Catholic church down here in Johnson City. I mean, it's full. They're parking in the grass in the neighbor's yard. It's because they're going there to be entertained. They don't understand. We are not the audience. God is Jesus. Everything we do, we God.
Well, the thing about year or two ago, I trained drivers, pulling dry bulk freight and pulling tanks. But I had one with me that every other word was a cuss word. And I finally got to talking, worked it around where I got to talking about religion. First thing he said, well, I go to church. And I'm thinking, with that mouth, do you go to church? And I said, well, where do you go? Well, I don't know the name of it, but they've got a big screen in back of it, and they got a big orchestra over here, and it's just so enjoyable when you go. And I'm thinking, you know, and he never said a word about what God said, never said a word about what was taught in there, but he loved it because they had a big orchestra and a big screen and all that light show and all that stuff. But you know, some point in time, it's gonna be brought down. It may be the end, when God comes back and they realize that what they've done. We never know. I appreciate all the comments and appreciate everything and helping me get through. First lesson, we'll start on 1 Corinthians 1 through 9, this salutation. If I can get my tongue to work with my mouth, we'll be all right. Which usually my tongue does not work with my mouth. Come on. What do you think, Johnny? Mess up big time or? Okay, I appreciate it. I mean, you know, I know you're preaching, I know your voice.
Yeah.
Everything. I was trying to get Phil Abney started. I mean, you get him cranked up, that's 2 days. No,